Hi everyone, and welcome to LIBOR's Wednesday webinar. My name is Mary Ann Monteleone, Director of Professional Development for LIBOR, and I welcome you. As I informed you on the first Wednesday of the month, that this month, April, is National Fair Housing Month, and we're dedicating every Wednesday webinar toward fair housing. And we have some very special guests with us each Wednesday, and today is certainly not an exception. Let me tell you a little bit about our presenter today. Alexia Smokler is the Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs at the National Association of Realtors. She represents NAR's positions on fair housing to Congress and federal agencies and manages NAR's ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. Before joining NAR, Alexia worked in fair housing enforcement at HUD on the staff of Congressman John Conyers Jr. and with nonprofit civil rights organizations. We now have the privilege of having her work with the National Association of Realtors on behalf of the realtors, and we welcome her here today. Hi, Alexia.
Hi, thanks for your introduction, for the invitation to be with you. And good morning, or should I say good afternoon, Long Island. As mentioned, I'm Alexia Smokler, and I'm NAR's Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs. I work with our policy and lobbying team here in Washington, D.C., and I also run our ACT Fair Housing Initiative, which we launched shortly after publication of the Newsday investigation to emphasize accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. So part of my job is to answer member fair housing questions, and we get a lot of questions about marketing. What's the latest list of acceptable and unacceptable words and phrases? Am I allowed to say master bedroom anymore? What about his and hers closets or ocean view? Today, I want to help demystify fair housing marketing for you. I'm going to give you a foundation in the marketing provisions of the Fair Housing Act. I want you to understand why these provisions were put into place, what their purpose is, and what their purpose isn't. And that's going to help you figure out what the Fair Housing Act requires, what it doesn't require, and why you might want to go beyond what it requires. I'll give you a framework for analyzing those problematic words and phrases and put to rest a few common misconceptions that we hear. Now, I'm going to be talking to you about the law today, so I have to give a disclaimer that what I say here should not be construed as legal advice. Please follow up with your attorney or LIBOR's legal team on any questions relating to your specific circumstances. So one of my goals here today, and let me share my screen now, is to give you a deeper understanding, of why the discriminatory advertising provisions of the Fair Housing Act were put into place, to give you a deeper appreciation of what they're all about. So before the Fair Housing Act, real estate advertising made clear statements about which races and nationalities were welcome at a particular property. You see here, this is a real estate ad from Seattle in the 1940s. They're very proud and they want to advertise their list of protective restrictions in the neighborhood. And they've actually shown a racially restrictive covenant as a feature that they want to advertise. This advertising makes clear only white people are welcome in this neighborhood. Real estate listings also contained these statements. This here is an excerpt from an interview that I did with a realtor who worked in her mom's brokerage in the 1960s outside of Chicago. And she remembered reading in the listings, no blacks allowed, no Jews allowed. There's a covenant on this property. It's just the way business was done before the Fair Housing Act. So here is the text of the Fair Housing Act. This is the part that covers advertising. It shall be unlawful to make, print, or publish any notice, statement, or advertisement that indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination based on a protected class. This last highlighted part indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination. That is the key analysis in deciding whether an ad or a listing is in violation. So let's be clear what the Fair Housing Act prohibits. Ads or listings or other statements sending a message that a home seeker is not wanted at this property because of their race, nationality, religion, or et cetera, et cetera. Now, I also want to be clear on what this law is not for. It is not to protect people's feelings from being offended. People get mixed up on this distinction. So let's explore the contours of this by diving a little deeper into the way courts interpret this law. So the early Fair Housing Act cases made clear that that section from the law that I just showed you, it doesn't only outlaw explicit statements like no Jews allowed, but also any ad that an ordinary reader would believe indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination. That ordinary reader standard means that an ad may be illegal even if there is no intent to discriminate. It's about how the reader interprets the ad, not your intent in writing it. Now, using this standard, it's easy to categorize some ads as lawful or unlawful. No families, that's a clear violation. But sometimes it's not as clear because judging how the mythical ordinary reader might react to a particular phrase can be hard to predict. This uncertainty may be frustrating for those looking for a quick and easy answer to the question, what am I allowed to say and what am I not allowed to say? But some useful guidelines do exist. So who is this ordinary reader? Courts define the ordinary reader as neither the most suspicious nor the most insensitive of our citizenry. This is an important definition. Folks in the industry sometimes express a fear that every ad will be hyper scrutinized for even the slightest suggestion of discrimination. But that's not how the ordinary reader standard is applied. It's not the most suspicious member of our citizenry. It's an average person. Now, the ordinary reader standard does refer to members of the particular protected class who could be discriminated against by the words. So, for example, the average ordinary African American, if the ad allegedly indicates racial discrimination. So I want to emphasize again that the purpose of this provision is to expand housing opportunities, not to ensnare well-meaning realtors. So since the Fair Housing Act has passed, HUD has put out two sets of guidance about how to interpret this provision. The first one was in 1972, shortly after the passage of the Fair Housing Act. And it was really focused on ads that explicitly referred to race, national origin, or religion. Phrases like white private home or Jewish home, etc. Those kinds of terms were commonly in use when the Fair Housing Act passed. In that early memo, HUD also expressed concerns about certain code words like restrictive, exclusive, and traditional, because those words had often been used in a discriminatory way. In that 1972 memo, HUD also raised concern about an ad's reference to the proximity of the listing to a particular landmark, like a church, a synagogue, or a private club, if those references are associated with a prohibited characteristic like religion. Now, in 1995, HUD offered another memo. This one was a clarification, because people had misinterpreted the 1972 memo to forbid use of some acceptable words and phrases. So the 1995 memo clarified that terms like master bedroom, desirable neighborhood, mother-in-law suite, great view, walk-in closets, family room, did not violate the Fair Housing Act. It reiterated that ads should never refer to the potential buyer's race, national origin, or religion, but it allowed the use of a legal name of a property that contained such a reference, like Roselawn Catholic Home. Now, in those cases, we have to be careful because that could indicate a preference based on religion to the ordinary reader if the name of the development is Roselawn Catholic Home. And so HUD advised that those ads should include a disclaimer assuring home seekers that the property does not discriminate based on religion or other prohibited factors. In both of those documents, HUD stressed that determining whether a particular word or phrase violates the law depends on context. And that leads me to give you some news which may be disappointing to you. Neither HUD nor any other authoritative agency has ever published a list of words and phrases that are always allowed or always forbidden in every context. The fair housing word and phrase lists that you see on the internet have been developed by all kinds of entities, including local real estate boards, fair housing groups, newspapers, MLSs, and third-party vendors. These lists should be used with caution. We had our fair housing expert consultants take a look at 7 different fair housing word and phrase lists that they pulled off of Google. They found that the lists often contain different words and phrases and sometimes even contradict each other. For example, one list that our consultants reviewed identified the word prestigious as acceptable, while another list identifies the same word as prohibited. A lot of these lists are dated and just seem to recycle or reformat what other lists say. Some of these lists purport to be HUD approved. You might even see some that say NAR approved. This is a false claim. HUD has never promulgated or endorsed any such list. I'm sorry. And so while these privately generated lists might be used for an initial screen, they are not a substitute for the ordinary reader analysis. We've got to use our noggins here. Now, to add another wrinkle to this, another reason why you have to apply the analysis in context and not just checking off words from a list is that the sensibilities of the ordinary reader evolve over time with changes in our society. This means that a word, phrase, or symbol once thought acceptable might be considered unlawful today, and vice versa. Let's go through a few examples. The Confederate flag. As recently as 20 years ago, this symbol was commonly displayed at military celebrations, sporting events, and it flew over several state capitals. But in recent years, courts have ruled that displaying the Confederate flag on a job site may constitute a hostile work environment. The US military, NASCAR, and other public and private organizations have now banned its display. Today, an ordinary reader, in this case, an ordinary Black person, viewing a listing that contains a Confederate flag could reasonably conclude that that ad indicates a racial preference or discrimination, even though 20 or 30 years ago, we might not have looked at it that way. And at NAR's annual meeting last November, our Pro Standards Committee determined that a listing broker's inclusion, intentional or not, of photos, including the Confederate flag, could be reasonably construed as indicating a racial preference or illegal discrimination. Now, here's another example. Now, this one, the ordinary reader's sensibilities went the other way. A phrase became less problematic with the passage of time, and that's exclusive neighborhood. The 1972 memo from HUD advised that restrictive, exclusive, and traditional should be avoided when used in a discriminatory context. And at that time, those words were regularly used as signals that properties were not available to some races and religions. People often described private clubs that didn't use. That word restricted is hardly ever used in housing ads. Similarly, exclusive, which is now sometimes used as just marketing speak to convey a special deal, or traditional, which is now used to describe an architectural style, those words seem unlikely to indicate today to the ordinary reader an illegal preference or discrimination. Now, let me give you one more, master bedroom. This is an example of how evolving sensibilities can make a phrase problematic without having reached the stage of being illegal. So for decades, this phrase has been used as a way of describing a home's largest bedroom. As I mentioned, that 1995 memo from HUD said master bedroom was fine, no problem. It's unlikely that, according to the ordinary reader standard, the ordinary Black person would read the words master bedroom in a listing or an ad and think, I am not welcome at this property. And remember, that's the test. But today, many realtors prefer to use the word primary instead of master bedroom because some realtors and clients are uncomfortable with the word master and its association with the legacy of slavery. So this brings us to a question that you've got to ask when you're writing ads, which is, even if a phrase doesn't violate fair housing law, are there other reasons why you may not want to use it? Perhaps even if a phrase doesn't indicate discrimination according to that legal standard, you may still choose to remove words or phrases because you want to create listings that convey openness and inclusivity without offending people's sensitivities. And there's a business reason for getting rid of old-fashioned phrases like mother-in-law suite or Jack and Jill bathroom, which is that there are more descriptive architectural terms that would convey information more accurately. I know that when I first moved to Virginia from Detroit and I saw the term plantation shutters in a listing, I had to look it up. I didn't even know what it meant. That listing was not giving me information that I could understand. Now, getting back to the letter of the law, and none of this will be earth-shattering to you, I don't think. Here are some rules of thumb in evaluating whether an ad or a listing violates the Fair Housing Act. The most basic general rule is that the ad should describe the property and its features. So you can say it has 4 bedrooms, it's in a quiet neighborhood, or it's accessible to individuals with disabilities. This is true even if the accurate description of the property may discourage some potential home seekers. For example, an ad that accurately describes a property as being in a non-elevator building may discourage persons with mobility impairments, but that does not violate the Fair Housing Act. On the other hand, ads invite litigation if they say or imply anything about the type of people who may want to buy or rent. You never want to say ideal for in your listing. Describe the property and not the people who you think should live there. Now, here are some more questions to ask in analyzing whether a particular ad violates the Fair Housing Act. Does the ad describe the property and not the demographics of the surrounding community? Is it using certain code words or phrases that suggest the demographic traits of the local market? You wouldn't want to include any of those. Does the ad use welcoming language accessible for people with disabilities? That's great. Does it imply in some way that one group of people is preferred over another? Does it contain symbols like a Confederate flag or others that may suggest certain people aren't welcome here? Does the ad refer to racial, ethnic, or religious landmarks? Now, you know, many cities formally recognized communities whose names include specific ethnic references, like Chinatown in San Francisco or Ukrainian Village in Chicago. Ads using those names that have been accepted and appear on the map do not violate the Fair Housing Act unless they also indicate some preference or limitation based on the race. But remember, in those ads, you want to be particularly careful to also include a disclaimer that this property is open to all, not just Ukrainians or whatever the name of the neighborhood is. So now we're going to put on our ordinary reader hats and practice this analysis. I don't think you're able to speak. So let's see. Can I see the chat window, Marianne? Okay, I'm going to invite you to put your reactions. Let's see, maybe it's in the Q&A to some examples. And if I can't hear you, I'll just give you the answer.
You should be able to see it, Alexia. You should.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let's try it. Ocean view. What do you think? Does this can indicate a preference, limitation, or discrimination to the ordinary reader? I'm looking. Oh, aha. Dennis says no. Dennis, you are correct. Some people have been concerned that somehow a person who is blind might see this phrase, ocean view, and think that they might be offended. But most disability groups that we talk to are not concerned with the phrase ocean view. They know it doesn't mean that a blind person is not welcome at the property. Nice work, Dennis. Let's try the next one. His and hers closets. What do you think? Preference, limitation, or discrimination? Oops. You guys, you're not, oh, okay. Jim and Jennifer say no. Ruth says not good. Donna says yes. Okay, we got some mixed answers here. So the idea here is what? That a gay couple would think that they're not welcome. or that a man would think he's not welcome. That's what you would have to prove. A plaintiff would have to show that reading the term his and hers closets indicated to me, I am not welcome at this property. The correct answer is no, this is not a Fair Housing Act violation. But this might be one of those situations where maybe you don't want to use this phrase anyway. Maybe it will offend some people. Maybe you can find a better, more descriptive term. What does his and hers closets even mean? Does that mean there are two closets? I don't know. So I don't think that a federal judge who just heard a RICO case is going to read his and hers closets and think that a realtor is suggesting that gay people are not welcome at the property. But you still might not want to include it. Walk to synagogue. What do we think, folks? Let's see, Dennis. No, you're saying no is in bad, wrong. Don't include this. Anyone else? Dennis, you are correct. You would not want to include this in your listing. Now, the walk to isn't the problem. And some folks have expressed concern about walk to beach, that somehow a person with a disability may have an objection to that term. And I think that you could have a more descriptive term, such as 2 blocks to the beach, that would probably serve consumers better. But walk to isn't the problem. It's synagogue that's the problem here. This suggests that you have a preference for members of the synagogue. You have a preference for Jewish people in this listing. Okay, I got one more for you guys. This is a tricky one. Excellent schools. So there's never been a fair housing case filed against a realtor or an MLS for using the term excellent schools. But our fair housing consultant who's written the casebook on fair housing law that the litigators thinks that if someone were analyzing all your listings and saw that you were putting excellent schools for only some schools that were associated in neighborhoods with a particular racial group, and you were not putting that for other schools that were associated with neighborhoods in a different racial group, you might have a disparate impact problem, meaning that you have a neutral policy that affects protected classes differently. So schools is a tricky one. The problem here is that by using the word excellent, you are providing your subjective assessment of the quality of that school. You never want to provide your subjective opinion. You want to refer the client to objective, third-party sources of information. So what could you say instead of excellent schools? You could provide statistics about that school and allow the client to draw their own conclusion. Now, statistics are problematic, and that's a topic for another day, but you could mention what kind of programs that school has, which may be more valuable to a consumer than a score on a website. Do they have a great marching band, services for students with special needs, an awesome AP program? All of those kinds of descriptions of a school are permissible because they are accurate and objective. You're not giving your subjective opinion. So I hope my presentation today has helped clear up some of the confusion around fair housing marketing. Remember, the purpose of the law is to ensure that ads do not indicate a preference limitation, or discrimination. It is not to avoid offending people. But perhaps in your business, you want to go beyond the minimum that the law requires. Perhaps you, as a person endeavoring to serve the whole marketplace, want to be sure that you are using welcoming and inclusive language that doesn't make anyone feel bad, even if that doesn't violate the law. And remember that ordinary reader standard is always evolving. So something that isn't a violation today may be a violation in 10 years. So why not use descriptive terms and get rid of some of these old-fashioned phrases? Your excellent LIBOR staff is here to support you as you work your way through these questions, and please feel free to reach out to me anytime with your fair housing issues. I'm not sure if I can put my email in the chat, but we'll get it to you. That's all I have for you today. Thanks a lot for having me. Mary Ann, have we got any closing
yes.
comments?
Thank you so much, Alexia. Do you have any time for a question if they have a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's just look at the Q&A if anybody has any question. It was great information. Let's see. Just scrolling through. I don't
There's
see
some
any
hands raised, but I don't know if people can speak. You might have to question into Q&A bar of your screen.
I just see some thank yous. I don't see any
Okay.
questions.
Okay, folks.
Yep, no questions, just thank yous. So thank you so much. This has been recorded, so if anyone wants to go back and rehear this, you can go to lirealtor.com and look under education. You'll see Wednesday webinars, and in a day or so, you'll see Alexia's informative webinar there for you to review or pass along to another LIBOR member. Thank you so much. I know you carved out time for us today and you have a very busy day, so thank you.
All right, thanks, y'all. Look forward to
Okay.
seeing you sometime soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.